So wonderful to see everyone saying hello in the chat. Please continue to use the chat as much as you'd like. We also have the Q&A function turned on that we're going to be, we can receive questions throughout the webinar. We are going to get going here because we do have a tight schedule and we want to leave as much time for answering your questions as possible. So we're going to start. I am Vander Gack. I am Northeast SARE's communication specialist. And just some basic housekeeping here. These are the calls for proposals are out. They are live right now. We have them called the 2023 proposals because that's when the programs will start. So we have some recorded sections today, which we're going to be making available after. And of course, we are recording the full webinar. We've got closed captioning is being provided by UVM CART, and I am going to paste the link in the chat here. And we just thank them so much for that. We are hosted out of UVM, and so we have the Q&A function is turned on, as I said. Please use it throughout. Any questions that you have, we're going to be trying to respond to them either as fast as we can or saving them for the end and then going through all the questions that we can before we close out for the day. After we close out the webinar, there is going to be an anonymous survey, and we really appreciate any feedback that you can provide on that. And now I'd like to pass it off to our Associate Director, Heather Oman.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heather. I'm the Associate Director of Northeast SARE. The Northeast Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program, or Northeast SARE, is funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and we offer grants and education to farmers, educators, service providers, researchers, and others to address key issues affecting the sustainability of agriculture throughout our region. We serve a 12-state region from Maine to West Virginia, and including Washington, D.C. And the work we do and the projects we fund are all grounded in our outcome statement, which you can see on the screen, and I'll also read it to you now. Agriculture in the Northeast will be diversified and profitable, providing healthful products to customers. Farmers and the people they work with will steward resources to ensure sustainability and resilience and foster conditions where farmers have high quality of life and communities can thrive. So the purpose of today's webinar is to help you as potential applicants to understand the differences between the research and education, professional development program, and research for novel approaches grant programs, and to determine which might be the best fit for your ideas. We want to support your potential for success by identifying components of a strong pre-proposal and empowering you to feel comfortable reaching out with questions today and beyond. We hope to achieve this by introducing you to our grant coordinators and a grantee. And so now we'll move into talking about some of the specifics.
Hello, my name is Nevin Dawson, and I am the Professional Development Program Associate Coordinator. I work with Katie Campbell Nelson to manage the Professional Development Grant Program and our state coordinators. I first got involved with SARE as a grad student when I worked on a project with historically underserved farmers in North Carolina. I later served as the state coordinator for the University of Maryland, running projects in soil health, and then I gradually transitioned into my current staff role. I love seeing the diversity of education models used by our grantees and state coordinators and the passion for personal and organizational growth throughout every level of SARE. I'm going to talk a bit about who can apply. We accept applicants from all kinds of organizations, including extension, colleges and universities, for-profit businesses, including consultants and farmers, municipalities, nonprofits, tribal governments, and state and federal departments. Applicants and their host organizations may be located outside of the Northeast region as long as the project activities and the audience served are located primarily within the Northeast region. Here's a chart of all 6 of our public-facing competitive grant programs. Note that the partnership grant is not one of the larger grant programs, and we won't be focusing on it today, but it does have a similar range of eligible applicants as our larger grant programs, and can be a great starting point for projects that need more groundwork before being able to justify a proposal in one of the larger grant programs. These bottom three are the ones that we will focus on today. First, I'll talk a bit about the differences between each of these programs. The research and education and professional development grant programs both require a performance target. You can think of the performance target as the outcome of your project if everything went exactly to plan. The presentations on these programs later on today will have a lot more detail on what this means. Each program funds a different type of work or audience. A research and education project must include a robust farmer education program that will result in measurable on-farm changes, and those would be described by the performance target. And these changes should lead to greater sustainability. The focus on farmer behavior change is a key requirement of this grant program. The project may also include an applied research component that supports the education program. This is not required. Applicants are generally researchers, farmers, educators, and others who work with farmers. A Research for Novel Approaches project must include a strong proof of concept applied research component intended to confirm the benefits and/or feasibility of new practices and approaches that have high potential for adoption by farmers in the near future. Applicants are generally researchers of all different kinds and can come from any of the eligible organizations previously mentioned, such as community organizations, consultants, or traditional research institutions. A professional development project provides education for educators and service providers who work with farmers. These service providers then use what they've learned through participation in project activities in their work with farmers, as described by the performance target. Applicants are generally people who work with farmers, educators, and/or other kinds of service providers. The minimum funding level for each program is $30,000. There is no actual funding cap for these programs, but proposals funded typically request no more than $250,000 for research and education, $200,000 for research for novel approaches, and $150,000 for professional development, depending on the project's complexity and duration. Now I'll talk a little bit about the similarities between all three of these large grant programs. For all of them, the project duration is 1 to about 3 years. A pre-proposal is required for all three. All three require collaborators. This takes the form of an advisory committee, which is not required to be defined until the full proposal phase. And the advisory committee will consist of at least 2 farmers and 1 agricultural service provider. It is required that this committee provides input on project design and implementation. Expenses that are eligible for Northeast SARE funds include labor, materials and supplies, or things that get used up throughout the course of a project, services, meeting and training expenses, subawards to other organizations, indirect costs up to 10%, and project-specific equipment. Ineligible expenses include those costs used to start or expand farming operations, like regular farm equipment like a tractor, or land or structures. These are not allowed. So, what is a pre-proposal? A pre-proposal is a preliminary concept document that allows SARE reviewers to select the most promising projects to be invited to submit full proposals. These are generally only 1,000 to 1,500 words in length. Pre-proposals are intended to save time for both applicants and reviewers. Applicants don't have to develop the full details required for a full proposal just to see if the idea will fly. And reviewers don't have to spend time reading all of those details if they know that the idea or the concept is not fundable. Pre-proposals are required for all three of the large grant programs that we're talking about in this video. Applicants are only invited to submit full proposals if the pre-proposal has a strong database justification. In the research and education and professional development programs, a clear and measurable performance target and effective approaches to achieving that target are also required. Projects must strive for wider adoption of sustainable practices and must be clearly grounded in our outcome statement. An individual project leader or principal investigator may not submit more than 2 pre-proposals per grant program per year, so that's a total of 6. If you submit multiple pre-proposals and more than one of them is invited to submit a full proposal, you may only select one of those invited pre-proposals to submit a full proposal across all 3 programs. Here are a few more details that may help you with planning your pre-proposal. Northeast SARE does not require host organization approval at the pre-proposal phase, which means that you don't need to submit a form signed by your organizational official. Although, keep in mind, your organization may have its own policies about internal review, even for pre-proposals. We no longer ask for any budget information in the pre-proposal. However, a detailed budget is required as part of the full proposal. Funds are reimbursed on a net 30-day basis. This does mean that your organization must make initial payment for project expenses, but we work hard to process your invoices as quickly as possible. Matching funds are not required by SARE. They are not encouraged and do not increase a proposal's ranking. Results of funded projects are part of the public domain. Contact us as soon as possible to request disability-related accommodations. Here is the timeline for our large grant programs. Pre-proposals are due on August 2nd at 5 p.m. Full proposal invitations will be sent out on August 29th, 2022. All applicants will be notified at this time of their status, whether a full proposal is invited or not. As a reminder, all applicants will receive a summary of reviewers' comments about their proposal. It is intended to support you in developing a strong full proposal or for modifying your pre-proposal to submit next year, or as an indication that the idea you submitted is not a good fit for our programs. The full proposal deadline is October 25th, 2022, 5 p.m. The award decision will be made in late February of 2023, and all projects will have a contract start date of March 1st, 2023, although you may choose to begin your project activities at a later date. Here's an important note. As part of Northeast SARE's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice Strategic Plan, we will be examining our grant programs and procedures and may make structural changes to our grant-making systems. To accommodate this work, these grant programs that we're talking about today may not have a call for pre-proposals in 2023. Thank you, and at this point, we will pause for questions.
So if anyone has any questions, we're seeing lots of chat going on, which is fantastic. You can also submit questions through the Q&A section. And now we are going to move on to research for novel approaches. And Callie.
Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us today. I am going to take some time to discuss the Research for Novel Approaches grant program. My name is Callie McPeters, and I am the manager of this and one other grant program here at Northeast SARE. And my previous professional and lived experience has been primarily research-based, evaluating market channel selection for Vermont vegetable producers and investigating the impact of policy decisions and local purchasing incentives at the institutional level. I really enjoy managing the Research for Novel Approaches program because it attracts proposals that are new and inventive in their approach to sustainable agriculture. The program was born out of the desire to fund new practices and approaches that need additional testing or refinement before recommending for farmer adoption. The work that comes out of this program is of strong interest to farmers across the Northeast, and producer need is central to all successfully awarded projects. The Research for Novel Approaches program shares the same applicant eligibility requirements of the other 2 large grant programs, However, it does not require an educational component, and it does not use performance targets as a metric to track adoption or behavioral change. It is purely a research-driven funding track that supports the work and that demonstrates a high likelihood of farmer adoption in the near future. It's important to make the distinction that this grant program does not fund exploratory research. We have 1.75 million available in total funding for this year, and funded projects typically are in the $30,000 to $200,000 range and run 2 to 3 years in duration. This is one of Northeast SARE's most competitive grant programs, and on average, we expect to receive about 80 pre-proposals, of which a little over a third will be invited to submit a full proposal. Of those that do submit full proposals, we typically expect to fund around 30%, which normally is about 8 to 10 total projects. This grant program is for researchers who work with farmers looking to fund proof of concept projects. Project leaders can be personnel from agricultural and community nonprofit organizations, federal agencies, for-profit business entities, tribal governments, or colleges and universities, just to name a few. By proof of concept, we mean that evidence from prior experiments or pilot projects strongly suggests that a practice or approach is beneficial and feasible, but that additional testing or data is needed before recommending for farmer adoption. This includes practices or approaches that have been proven successful outside of the Northeast, but that require additional testing or refinement to make them beneficial for farmers in our specific region. When applying, keep in mind that successful research for novel approaches proposal needs to clearly explain the gap in research results that currently prevents the promotion of the practice. Strong proposals need to include a clear path to adoption by farmers should the research prove that the approach is feasible. For this reason, novel approaches that have a high likelihood for success but depend on a cost-prohibitive technology would not be competitive unless there was a plan in place to make the technology accessible to the average grower. My tip for potential applicants is that you should always be conscious to write your proposal with the reviewers in mind. Plan to write for a mixed audience and assume that reviewers have agricultural knowledge, but not necessarily deep expertise in your proposal subject area. Because of this, it is best to keep your writing clear and simple and to avoid too technical a jargon. I'm now going to lift up a project that was funded in this last year. This is project number LNE 22456R. It is culturally meaningful, regionally adapted seed, making the Ujamaa Cooperative Farmers Alliance market ready. This recently funded project supports the Ujamaa Cooperative Farming Alliance, which is a collective of BIPOC seed growers to enhance the market viability of culturally meaningful, regionally adapted seed in the Northeast to strengthen the cultural appropriateness and climate resilience of the food system. It is led by Project PI Dan Tobin at the University of Vermont with a subaward to the Ujamaa Cooperative Farming Alliance. So I would like to walk through why reviewers thought that this was a strong proposal. Establishing farmer interest is central to all successful research for novel approaches projects. It is important that your application makes the case that farmers are asking for this work and that also that there will be a high potential for adoption should the approach be proven beneficial. The Ujamaa project presented both regional and state-specific survey data and also cited conference and workshops attendance numbers as evidence to support a high level of farmer interest in their planned work. Additionally, the project is farmer driven and growers are embedded at every phase of project development and planned research activities. Through bi-weekly meetings, the development of a farmer-led research team, the project intentionally makes space for meaningful engagement and feedback from farmer stakeholder groups. Reviewers appreciated the project's emphasis on building trust and mutual support networks for the growers involved in the work. As I mentioned before, a successful novel approaches project needs to bridge a knowledge gap that prevents the practice or approach from being adopted today. In this case, this proposal made clear to reviewers why further value chain research was needed to support the development of a market for culturally meaningful seed. The project fulfills the proof of concept framework by building on successful models of the Global South, where impoverished smallholder farmers have successfully linked culturally meaningful crop varieties to competitive market opportunities. By adapting strategies of pro-poor value chain development, This project aims to establish a methodology for other agricultural producers to develop markets for products containing important social and cultural value in addition to their economic and ecological value. Finally, a competitive novel approaches proposal needs to have a sound research design that includes treatments, methods, data collection, and analysis that are well designed to test your research question and easy for reviewers to understand. Reviewers agreed that the participatory mixed method design of this highlighted project was well detailed and referenced back to clearly laid out project objectives. The data collection plan included an in-depth timeline of research activities and deliverables, making it easy for reviewers to assess what would be happening at each phase of the planned work. Whether your research is in the field, laboratory, or collected through focus groups and interviews, it's important to be as detailed as possible about your approach. If reviewers are left wondering about your experimental design, sample size, or data collection protocols, your proposal is likely to score less competitively than those that are clear in addressing these points. Thank you all for your interest in this program, and I'm happy to take your questions at the end of today's webinar.
Wonderful. And just a reminder, seeing some questions coming through in the Q&A and in the chat. Always great. Please continue to just let those flow as they pop up. We want to make sure that we're covering everything. Any question that you ask, maybe something someone else is wondering. So you are helping out us and you're helping out them. Now we're going to Katie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Katie Campbell-Nelson. I'm the Professional Development Coordinator with Northeast SARE, and I manage this grant program with Nevin Dawson. He's located in Maryland at the University of Maryland Extension, and I'm located with Cornell Cooperative Extension at the Agroforestry Resource Center in Greene County. So a little bit about myself, my background. I was an agricultural educator most of my career. I've taught for the Stockbridge School of Agriculture. I've been a vegetable extension educator, and in this role, I support service providers or community educators who work with farmers. And I've found that really prioritizing my own education makes me better as an educator, and not a lot of professional development is available for service providers all the time. And so it's a great opportunity to take advantage of this grant program. I also have a tip for you. If you are applying for any Northeast SARE grant, there is a state coordinator located at each land grant institution everywhere in the Northeast, so from West Virginia to Maine, and they may have a better idea of how to help you if they're located in the state you are located in or where your project will be. So you may reach out to any of them, and Nevin and I work with them as well. And I think Vander will put a link to finding them from our website for you all to access. So this grant program is for the benefit of service providers who work with farmers. Now, a service provider primarily works with farmers in their career, but this program is also for anybody who's being trained to work with farmers. So we've funded projects like training lawyers or real estate agents to learn more about farm succession planning and be effective at working with farmers. So those types of participants are also eligible. These proposals must have a strong interest from service providers to participate, and the relationship between the service providers and the farmers need to be strong in order for these proposals to be well reviewed. We have about $1 million in funding this year for this program, and typical projects come in around $30,000 to $150,000. This is one of Northeast SARE's least competitive grant programs, so I definitely recommend to you to apply to keep Nevin and I busy. We typically receive about 25 pre-proposal applications a year. 80% of those may be invited to submit a full proposal, and then 50% of those may succeed. So that comes out to about 5 to 10 projects per year are funded. So I'd love to share with you an example of a performance target. So because currently research and education and professional development grants are the only two Northeast SARE grants that require a performance target. The research and education grants performance targets measure behavior change in farmer participants. And in this grant program, we measure behavior change in service provider participants. So you may want to follow along if you have pen and paper, sort of to practice how to get this prepared for it's a great planning opportunity for you to plan your project. So a performance target in our program has 3 parts: the number of service providers who will take action to assist farmers, the action these service providers will take to assist farmers, and the number of farmers who will be assisted. So if you follow along with this example, we have 17 tribal farm staff will teach curriculum and workshops to 150 subsistence and direct market farmers in 6 tribal nations. That performance target has all 3 parts. You may also optionally include a farmer outcome in these performance targets. And it's common that a farmer outcome will be fewer than the farmers who were included in the education. And that's common because farmers may learn about a project or a new practice without actually implementing it, or also just resources and implementation takes a lot of time. So be realistic about what you actually want to measure in your project. So if you've practiced writing this down, you may have questions later about how your performance target for your project is coming along, and don't hesitate to reach out. So I'd like to end by sharing with you all an example of a professional development grant program. And this is just an example of one that came in that was well reviewed by proposals, and I'll share with you why. The Northeast Climate Adaptation Fellowship to support vegetable and fruit farmers has the project leader, Rachel Shatman at the University of Maine. And this photo was sent to me as a pocket dial, actually, from a farmer fellow, climate fellow, Ryan Fitzbeauchamp. And it's a picture of a climate adaptation strategy of rolling sweet clover with this tractor, with the roller in the back and the bucket in the front, and then the tarp covers this crop. And without tilling, they are not releasing carbon into the atmosphere, and instead trapping all the nutrients in the soil. So this practice was made possible through this project, and I'll explain why this was well reviewed. This was something that was an outcome of this project, but the proposal came in, and the relationship between the service providers and farmers were really strong and well described. They proposed a stipend be offered to these partners to work together to either plan or even implement a climate adaptation strategy. So this photo is an example of one that was implemented, and the reviewers really liked that strong peer aspect of the proposal. This project also connected many agricultural service providers and farmers in 12 different states. So there's really cool projects like this happening in all 12 states across the Northeast region. And the last thing that reviewers really appreciated was that this Climate Adaptation Fellowship had a strong education plan and a strong team. So I just wanted to share that about the professional development program. Reach out with any questions. Thank you for listening, and be in touch.
Thank you so much, Katie. I see, Lauren, I'm going to get a different version of that link in the chat in just a moment here. And we are going to move along back to Heather.
Hi again, everybody. In my role as Associate Director of Northeast SARE, I'm also the grant coordinator for the Research and Education Program. Before I came to Northeast SARE, I worked with farmers on business, market, and whole farm planning. Doing that work, I was exposed to the incredible innovation and practical knowledge I saw expressed in unique ways on every farm that I visited. I love working with the Research and Education Grant Program because farmer engagement, leadership, and education are the core components of this grant program. Next slide. So, this grant program is designed to directly benefit farmers. There is $2,250,000 available in total funding for this program, and funded projects are typically in the $30,000 to $250,000 range, depending on complexity and duration. Research and education projects are usually 2 to 3 years long. We often receive around 70 pre-proposals for this grant program, of which half will be invited to submit full proposals. Of those that do submit full proposals, around 30% will be funded, around 10 to 15 total projects. It's important to remember that all typical success rates shared today are based on historical numbers of submissions and could change if the number of submissions changes. The core focus of a strong research and education grant is farmer adoption and behavior change that leads to greater sustainability. Thus, education that brings about behavior change is the only required component, and we fund many strong research and education proposals with and without research elements. A strong research and education proposal that does include research will make it clear that the education plan can stand on its own, regardless of the outcome of the research plan. So, for example, the achievement of the performance target cannot depend on research results. Research, when included, is clearly related to the education plan and would create new information that could be incorporated into that plan. So one tip I can offer applicants, and you'll hear some of us emphasizing the same things because they're really important, is to pay attention to the review criteria when applying for research and education or any of Northeast SARE's grants, and they're in the pre-proposal calls. Try on a reviewer's mindset. Does this project seem grounded in Northeast SARE's outcome statement? Reviewers will directly consider that. And does the proposal clearly respond to the question and the review criteria that are, again, listed in the calls? Yeah, and so Katie and I are both spending time talking about performance targets because we know that sometimes this concept can be new to folks. And so this slide includes 3 examples of performance targets from successful research and education proposals. And a reminder, a performance target is a fancy way of saying the best possible outcome if everything in your project goes to plan. It should clearly relate to the statement of need and guides the development of your educational activities. Every performance target should include 4 components. And I'm going to use this first one on the slide as an example. The first component is the number of farmers. So you can see here, 100 farmers. And the next component is the specific change or practice that farmers will adopt. So in this example, the use of integrative parasite control. The third component of a performance target is the extent of farmer adoption. And so that can be represented in a bunch of different ways. But in this example, these new techniques will be utilized in 2,000 or more sheep and or goats. And then the fourth component is that measurable benefit, which in this example is farmers will save an estimated $28 per head in reduced chemical dewormer usage. So with performance targets, be as specific as possible and know that we know that this is not a guarantee. We want it to be realistic and ambitious, but we understand that it's not a guarantee. So the scope of impact represented in a performance target entirely depends on what is reasonable and appropriate to your project. Remember, if you're invited to submit a full proposal, you will need to clearly outline how you're going to verify every one of those 4 components. And if you're funded, you're going to be asked to report against each of them as well. So a few more tips on how to write a strong performance target. That key element is ambitious and realistic. Reviewers do seriously consider the scope of impact of a proposal and whether applicants have fully considered the quality of that impact and what is realistically possible. And this can really vary significantly depending on the type of project. So sometimes 20 farmers and a total of 5 acres is ambitious and realistic, like with urban agriculture. Or sometimes 100 farmers and 2,000 acres is more appropriate, for example, with agronomic crops. There really is no one size fits all. So I'm going to also finish my part with an example of a really awesome research and education proposal and funded project. And that's teaching Black farmers in Baltimore City to grow ethnic crops for Black communities, led by Denzel Mitchell of the Farm Alliance Baltimore. And this project created a training program for beginning Black farmers in Maryland. They utilized classroom learning, field day instruction, and farmer-to-farmer mentorship. They focused on producing locally relevant cultural crops and developing markets with Black business owners. The project leaders leveraged partnerships at both the University of Maryland and in local city governments. So why was this a strong proposal and project? There was well-documented and strong farmer engagement in the project design and implementation. There was clear evidence throughout the proposal that the organization and project team are embedded in and understand the community of farmers they work with. And the team included and compensated leadership from that community. There was a strong educational approach in this project that utilized a diversity of activities, including classroom time with readings, videos, and guest farmer speakers, hands-on field days with transportation provided, farmer-to-farmer mentorship where all parties were compensated for time and expenses, one-to-one coaching from the project team, and additional opportunities for practicing new agricultural techniques learned in class. Reviewers felt the performance target was specific and verifiable, realistic, and yet ambitious. It was well grounded in the statement of need, and the education plan was clearly designed to lead to the outcome that is the performance target. Reviewers felt the education plan could proceed and enhance sustainable agriculture in the Northeast, regardless of the research project outcomes. And the research component was well designed to complement the education plan as both an effort to develop enterprise budgets for culturally relevant crops and as an in-depth assessment of the impact of the program on food sovereignty in the community. Both farmers and community members are and will be engaged in the research design and efforts. Thanks for listening. If questions continue to come up, keep going. And now I am so excited to introduce Dr. Kwame Matthews, who is the grantee that's going to be speaking with us today and answering questions if you have them. And Dr. Matthews is a research and extension professional at Delaware State University, which is an 1890 land grant institution and a historically Black university. Kwame has been a project leader on a few different Northeast SARE grants, most recently a research and education grant titled Increasing the Use of Natural Fungus to Control Internal Parasites in Small Ruminants. Thank you again, Kwame, for your time. And would you be willing to start by just saying, why have you chosen to invest your valuable time in applying for Northeast SARE grants?
First, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invite, Heather. I would like to say that I put time in investing time into Northeast SARE grants because it fits very well with what I want to do as a small ruminant specialist. It fits perfect with research and extension as it provides significant funding to allow me to complete projects that will benefit farmers. These projects that benefit farmers will not just be beneficial to my program, but the farmers will improve sale and improve production, as most of my research projects are geared towards parasites. When we try to get projects from the Northeast SARE, I tend to look into what directly does the farmer want, what is going to help to impact that farmer, and then I'll write accordingly. So with that being said, most of the time what I'll try to do is try to find out how this SARE grant can help to bring equipment that is used for research and education, and also help with getting the message across to producers and to consumers about eating small ruminant meat. The Northeast SARE grants that I have worked with is normally very organized. It is normally going to help with producing good investment for the farmers. And to be honest, it covers funds that sometimes our universities do not have. So at an 1890 institution, most of the time we do not start working with startup costs or with startup funding, and Northeast SARE provides that startup funding because of a smaller grant, you can start from partnership. And with research and education, you can build on that partnership with farmers, and then you try to educate the farmers into the best fit of how to become very good at their production systems. I hope that answered your questions.
Thank you. It's perfect. What else would you like to share with folks about your experiences applying for and managing SARE grants?
So applying for SARE grants is actually a very good program. I enjoy applying because I can get to talk to the program leaders, and they'll give you insight into exactly what you will need when you're doing the grant. So when you communicate with anyone from SARE, they'll give you the information necessary, and then you can formulate the grant to fit what you want. The best thing that I say is normally to write a grant. When we're designing the grant, I look at how will this benefit a farmer. After I design the grant to benefit the farmer, I look at the idea, is this grant something that is readable by anyone outside of research or education? Because SARE is made up of, or the reviewers for SARE is made up of people from different walks of life. And therefore, you might not get only researchers, you might not get only extension specialists, but you might end up with a farmer that wants to make sure this is applicable to them. With the SARE grant, one point I should make is that SARE grant requires a detailed budget. And when SARE grant requires that detailed budget, it can be beneficial and it can also be challenging. It is beneficial because it gets you to think about everything that you think you will need for this project, and you start looking up pricing so that you don't make mistakes and put things in there that you don't need. When it comes to the challenge is that it is going to cost you to look through everything. The budgets that you write for SARE, it tells you detailed information. And in the past, I thought that SARE never funded equipment until I learned that SARE actually fund equipment for educational purposes. And the equipment they fund, they might for farmers, it's only partially for the duration of the project. So those are things I think about when we're writing the grants. Now, when you're writing the SARE grant, you want to make sure the language is clear. So one thing that I do when I write my SARE grant is give it to someone else to read. Particularly, I give it to most of my undergraduate students so that they can read through it and tell me I understood it or I didn't understand it. And if my students didn't understand it, then I reword and rewrite the grant to match where someone else that is not thinking science can read the grant and understand it. So those are some of the techniques that I think have made it successful for me to get a SARE grant. Another thing that I look at is the actual processing of SARE. Because SARE, on the SARE side of everything, it is easy to deal with the SARE personnel. When you come to the 1890 institution, a lot of 1890 institutions do not have all the hands on deck for the Office of Sponsored Programs and different offices. And therefore, starting out very early with this grant is critical, because then I can give that information. I can get all the signatures and get all the paperwork that is needed for any grant programming to go through. On the SARE side, if I have a question or if I have a problem on my side to get a signature, I can get documentation from anyone at SARE. And therefore, once those are submitted, then it makes my life easier. With the SARE grant as well, it is geared towards farmers, and therefore, like the grant that is listed here, the educational portion of the grant is very important. I make sure that we're educating farmers as much as possible. And in the case of dealing with farmers, most of my grants are written with farmer input. So most of the grants have some farmer input. I have several farmers that give me input to say if the grant makes sense for them, if the grant makes sense for Delaware, and then I will move forward with that. Thank you, Heather.
Beautiful. One more question for you, Kwame. What advice would you share with anyone who's thinking about applying, who may be working with or coming from organizations with fewer staff or overall less access to resources?
So it is important to stay organized. It is very important that you communicate with the host organization. So communicate with the staff ahead of time and try to get those required documents signed off before you start submitting the documents. With the SARE grants, normally for pre-proposals, as said, if there's a pre-proposal, you don't need the AOR to sign off on it. But after the pre-proposal has been accepted, then you will need signatures from many people in the campus. And at that point, or in your organization, at that point, you want to ensure that you're staying ahead of the game. Writing SARE grants can be very easy. Again, SARE, the personnel that work at SARE will help you in the sense of getting the documentation done. They'll tell you what you need, who you need to talk to, and definitely it spells it out in the proposal, but if you're not clear on something, or in the RFA, but if you're not clear on something, you can always contact one of the SARE personnel and they will assist you in doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Kwame.
Thank you so much. So at this point, we are going to move into specific questions that you might have for Kwame. And then feel free to continue to add other questions in the Q&A. Yeah. Shout them out and I'll make sure that I read them in my nicest radio voice. We've got Katie working on an answer in the Q&A section. But I'm going to ask you, so, well, there we go. Here, Ben asks, do you have any suggestions on the best way to engage farmers when writing a grant? Phone call, a survey, other approaches?
So I have used not survey, but phone calls and emails. Most of the time, when I'm writing a grant, I'll contact most of the farmers that are around in Delaware. So I have several sheep and goat farmers that I will communicate with throughout the year. And therefore, once I'm thinking about writing a grant, I'll talk to those farmers. Another mechanism is if you decide that you're going to write the grant and you have an idea, sometimes going to like events, workshops, and so on, you can meet the farmers there in person. And that is very good because then they will give you their opinion as to what they think about that idea working on the farm and if it makes sense for them as a farmer. Most of the grants that I write, I do write basic research grants as well. And those grants aren't directly applicable to the farmers immediately, but overall, when it comes out, the results in probably 2-3 years, then that can be applied to farm situations. So that's something that I normally do. And emails are always good to send to some farmers.
Kwame, as somebody who's also been on multiple ends of SARE grants, what can you say for people who might be interested in becoming reviewers, joining our technical committees?
So if you become a reviewer, that is actually a benefit to you as a person that want to write a SARE grant. So I have tried serving on all of SARE's review team so far. I think I only haven't served on 2 SARE grant reviews, but all the other teams I try, because what it does is give you that knowledge up front to see what SARE does when they're reviewing, to see how the grant proposals that get funded look. And in that sense, it will help you to design your grant properly. You're not stealing anybody's ideas, or don't steal people's ideas. But what you do is you try to organize the grant in a way that it's fundable and it's readable. Because again, when I review a grant, if I can't understand what is going on, that's not a benefit to the writer. It's a benefit if you can review the grant, you understand what you're reading, and then you can put through your most honest review of that proposal. If you write a grant and nobody can read it, more than likely, I'm not saying just for SARE, but in general, more than likely, if no one understands your grant, it can't be funded because they don't understand what you're doing. It's not clear to anyone where you're going to put the money, how you're going to utilize the funds when you get it, how you're going to do your research, how you're going to do your extension programs. And in that sense, that's not a benefit to anyone. Now, if you have questions I want to ask, and I've done this before, where what I've done with extension personnel is if you write a grant, and if you're a farmer, every state has extension. So every state has an extension specialist. And what you can do is if you're doing small ruminants, if you're doing crops, there's a specialist for something, all of those in your state. You can ask them to review your grant because that's what we do as extension personnel, is help farmers to get better results on their farm. So we will review your grant and give you feedback as to if it makes sense to submit or not.
Thank you so much. So we are at 1 o'clock here. We are going to be sticking around. We have until 1:30 for answering questions if you have any more. So please feel free to continue to fire those off in Q&A or in chat. I do want to point out that we have a how to apply video, our definition of a farm, last year's full call for proposals, and more information. It's all available on our website. And I am putting a link for that in the chat here. If you have any additional questions, you can reach out to grant coordinators. But again, we will be sticking around here to answer any other questions people have. Feel free to, if you have questions about your particular project. Ooh, and we have a hand up. Why is my hand not showing on here? Give me just a moment. Oh, and Melissa has a question here. What type of equipment can be purchased through this grant?
I'm happy to start with that one. And other folks can feel free to jump in. So equipment to be fundable by Northeast SARE, the equipment has to be clearly specific to the project and to the research and education mission of the project. So like in the beginning, when I was mentioning ineligible uses of funds, include most things that are considered to be startup and or capital costs for farms. So that usually includes things like tractors, greenhouses, certainly any buildings, any kind of machinery equivalent to tractors. Those things are generally not fundable by SARE. However, if you are, as part of your research or your education, you're exploring a new kind of implement or a new kind of process that involves certain equipment or machinery, that may be fundable. And then as Kwame alluded to in what he was sharing, if the organization is an organization that is clearly, if the recipient organization is clearly education or research and mission, and the equipment is going to be used in perpetuity for education or research, it is likely fully fundable by SARE if the project is reviewed favorably and awarded by the Administrative Council. When equipment goes from SARE to a for-profit business, where that piece of equipment might be used to generate profit once the project is over, then we have to prorate the cost of the equipment for the life of the grant when it is being used for research and education. So I can't really get too much more specific about the type of equipment. It all depends on the project and how it's justified and how it relates to the education and the research elements of the project. But I definitely encourage you to get in touch with the relevant grant coordinator after this, and we can try to help answer more specific questions. And if that didn't cover anything, feel free to follow up.
Thanks so much, Heather. So yes, any other additional questions that we have? Anyone have a project in mind that they're wondering the logistics of what it might look like to go through that? We'd love to talk about what different kind of fun projects we've had in the past. So you can kind of see what it might line up with. So you can go into the SARE database is incredible. If you are searching through the projects.sare.org, you can really find things that match up with something that's happened before and see how that resonates with what you've got in mind. This has been a ton of information. If people don't have any additional questions, we can wrap this up, and you can always, again, submit other questions to our individual grant coordinators. You can reach out to us, and we have the answers that were given during the Q&A. So we've got the call for proposals in 2023 with full proposals being considered, or will these grant programs not be offered? So Heather did explore an answer there. Do you want to give a little bit more information?
Yeah, happy to. I was wondering that if folks could tell that we'd submitted some answers. So I'll try to say this in as plain language as possible. So pre-proposal applicants for this call who are invited to submit full proposals that will be due October of this year, those folks will be reviewed, and those grants, those awards will be made in March of 2023. So anyone who submits a pre-proposal this year, who's invited to submit a full proposal, which is then awarded by the Administrative Council, all of those grants will be made this cycle. However, next May, which is typically when we release calls for pre-proposals, we may not release a call for pre-proposals next year, which would mean we also would not be releasing a call for full proposals next year. So this cycle that has now begun will complete as normal. It's just that next year we may not begin a new cycle. I hope that's clear.
And Heather, I see you answered another question we had from Andrew asking about proposals not being considered in 2023 and the effect on this year's funding pool.
Yeah, we do have a slightly bigger allocations this year than last year. They're not hugely different, but they are a little bit more.
And we had a question from T. I believe we did kind of cover that with your discussion of the pre-proposal plan. Pause there. Elaine, we do have a link there for all of the forms and clarifications can be found at northeastsare.org/grants/get-a-grant. Ben asked if a project spans multiple states, does it matter which state coordinator you reach out to? Katie, would you like to give a little more information on that?
Sure, yeah. So Ben, that was a good question. State coordinators in each state actually have their own expertise also. Like Kwame brought up, they're often in the extension service at the university. So they're a great person to reach out to just to get another perspective. They have their own networks. It's just a great way of building your network in whichever states you're in. So you may contact as many in all the states you plan to work in, and any one of us on staff. Thanks for asking that question. It's a good one.
And Katie, Mark had a question as well, and a follow-up there on professional development grants and whether they cover nonprofit training farmers on use of website and e-commerce technology.
Right. So that's also a good question about, and it might be helpful to think about. It could you want to help try and distinguish your audiences for your program. So if you're primarily working with farmers directly in training, you may look at the research and education grant program and focus on an education only, and that would be Heather's grant program. And if you are looking to train service providers to work with farmers on website or e-commerce technology, for example, any topic or subject matter, then you would look at the professional development grant program. So that sort of gives you the idea of two paths you may go. And if it's a brand new e-commerce technology program that no one has tried before, but it shows real promise, you call Callie. Thanks for that question.
And our last questions that we had here was from Emma on the frequency limit of reimbursement, and Heather answered that with a month. But is there any additional information that you'd like to provide on the reimbursement process, Heather?
I'll just say it out loud for folks in case that's helpful. If awarded a grant through Northeast SARE, you can invoice and be reimbursed by Northeast SARE as frequently as monthly. And we encourage grantees to invoice at least quarterly.
And I will say we have fantastic staff who works very hard to make sure that those get processed very quickly. We really try to be as responsive as we can. That covers all of the questions that have come through, that came through during the presentation. If you have any additional ones, now is definitely a great time to ask them before we wrap up and move into asking you to complete the survey once the webinar finishes. I want to thank everybody so much for taking the time today to come learn about our programs and for being very patient with our technical difficulties earlier. Oh, we have a question here from Michael. What if one is working on preparing high school students in urban agriculture? Which grant would that apply to?
This is a really good question, and other grant coordinators feel free to chime in. So Northeast SARE's founding legislation requires that the beneficiaries, the people who benefit from any grants that we make, must be farmers. And so with a project that's working with high school students, they could be secondary, or they can benefit from your work, but you would have to be able to articulate to reviewers how the primary benefiting people are farmers. And the USDA and Northeast SARE, we have that definition of a farm that Vander mentioned earlier, and that's up on our website, and it should give you some more specifics about how we define farms. And so Northeast SARE recognizes that youth and urban farming are something that often go hand in hand and are essential to our food system and to farming in our region. And we have this guiding line from our legislation where we need to benefit farmers. And so there are other folks that have figured out how to make that work. And if you want to reach out to me after this webinar, I'd be happy to point you to some projects that have been funded by SARE, but that is just something that you'd have to keep in mind. And in terms of which grant, I really think exploring maybe the partnership or even potentially the farmer grant program are good places to start. As for these three, it would probably be a research and education. It's hard to say without knowing more. And again, we're happy to talk. And that, I think it would probably either be a research and education or a professional development, maybe. Anything? Yeah, go Katie.
I didn't have anything to add to that one. I was going to answer the next one.
Well, thank you, Katie.
So the next question was about where can I look for funding for startups? And so Northeast SARE funding research and education does not fund the start of a farm, for example, and Yolanda, I'm sorry if I'm not misinterpreting or know if you're talking about starting a farm or another type of business. But we do have, similar to the group of state coordinators that I mentioned for Northeast SARE, there's beginning farmer and rancher coordinators across the United States. And I'm gonna paste in the chat a link to them. And I've worked with Sarah Campbell out of Washington, DC, and she manages this group of folks. And so they can help you with access to other USDA programs that may help you with startups.
We also
Heather,
had
it
a
looked like you-
question in the chat about if your project covers more than one grant, can you apply to more than one for different aspects of the project? And this portion of the information might have been skipped over in the beginning of today's webinar, but you are welcome as applicants to submit 2 pre-proposals per program each funding round. So you are eligible to submit 6 different pre-proposals this year. It is important in the eyes of reviewers that each of your proposals projects stand alone and are not contingent upon the success of another program or project. So keep that in mind. And then if you are invited to submit a full proposal for your project, you can only choose 1 per year across all 3 grant programs. So it could be the case that reviewers found 4 of your pre-proposals favorable and invited to submit. You would then have to make the decision which one to move forward and write a full proposal for.
We had a question come through in the chat from Carrie, which is, which grant would I apply for if my project is an aggregation of local produce from minority farmers and sent to wholesale and other markets?
Great question. I guess it depends on what you would want to do in that scenario. So for example, if your focus is educating farmers to around how to make that model work, that would probably be a research and education grant that just didn't have a research component. And that's, again, totally fine. Research and education grants only require an education component. If you were trying something about this effort had been tested, but wasn't like proven to be ready for adoption by those farmers, then it might be a research for novel approaches project. If you're trying to work with other service providers to teach them how to teach farmers to do this aggregation model, then it could be a professional development project. So it's all through the lens of like, are you researching something? Are you educating those farmers? Are you doing both? And then that would inform, I will say also, our partnership grant, which is not open right now, but just so folks know it exists, and our farmer grant, which is slated to open this fall for proposals, might also be different lenses that you could take on an idea like this. So I'm sorry, Carrie, to be basically almost any of our grants, depending on how you frame it and what your primary goal is, whether it's research or education, or both.
We have a pair of questions who have come in about farm ID number being ready from T. Darby, and then a question from Jacqueline on just some of the other requirements that you have to have ahead of applying for a grant. Would anyone like to take both of those?
Katie, I see you're typing an answer to T. Do you want to respond?
I was just going to say, no, you don't need to have a farm ID number. You may be a farmer to apply. You don't have to be a farmer to apply for any of these grants. I'm typing it because I'm going to add the link to our definition of a farm that will help you.
I'll read the question from Jacqueline out loud. I'm interested in setting up processing facility for small farms and educational sessions to teach farmers to use the equipment. Part of a small group of farmers, we call ourselves local fiber. Should we complete our tax stuff to be an official group tax wide, or can we make that part of our grant request? Should we have space secured for our equipment first, or should that be in the grant? So Northeast SARE, in the contract, if a grant is awarded, the contracting process will require tax documentation for the host organization. And so whoever is applying will need to have that sort of organizational status established in order to have the forms that are needed. But we do make grants to individuals, consultants, and the words are escaping me, sorry, but so it shouldn't, I don't think that should be a barrier. And then should we have space secured for our equipment? One thing, when reviewers are reviewing proposals, they do want to see that you either have what you need to implement a project or that you're asking for it. So again, like buildings wouldn't be an eligible cost for a Northeast SARE grant, but renting a facility would be. So you either need to have that space clearly lined up or have a plan for getting it lined up. Reviewers are going to look to see that you have everything you need to successfully implement the project.
We had a question come through in the chat from Brett, who is looking to start a 2-year farmer incubation education program, assuming the education grant would be a good fit, but these would be aspiring farmers rather than current farmers with land. How might they approach that?
So again, the farmers that benefit from the grant do need to meet our definition of a farm, which does require that those folks either have or could have had $1,000 of commercial product in the previous year. And so again, when folks don't meet our definition of a farm, it doesn't mean they can't be part of a grant. It just means they cannot be the main benefiting audience. And so there may be ways where this project is teaching other farms or other service providers about the model that's being tested. And then this could be potentially a fundable Northeast SARE grant. But again, that primary benefiting audience has to be farmers that meet our definition. And so that one's going to depend a little bit on what the specifics are.
And Yolanda just connected for a moment there, but that applies to that question as well for high school students. Just to reiterate that, yes, that farmer focus is the forward point. We had a question in the chat from Nicole on restoring a building or barn as part of a grant.
Unlikely, because that's considered capital infrastructure. Again, unless a building is being adapted to research a specific technique or new approach, then it might be possible, depending on the specifics of how you pitch your idea and what you're planning on doing. But usually anything involving buildings is not fundable by Northeast SARE. And just to build on what Vander was saying for Yolanda, the answer is high school students cannot be the primary benefiting audience of a Northeast SARE grant. Farmers have to be that primary audience, but high school students can be a secondary or involved community group in the grant, as long as it's clear how farmers that meet our definition of a farm are benefiting. And please, Katie.
Oh, no, I think you answered that one. And before we left, I actually wanted to follow up on your answer to Brett about training for aspiring farmers. And this is a tip really just for anyone on any of the topics that they may have a question about. It's really helpful to maybe go to our projects.sare.org search projects function and look at other projects that have been funded, and all their reports are available there. So for Brett, you might go in and type. Oh, you did. Oh, thank you, Heather. You might search, aspiring or beginning farmer, because we have funded projects with those project audiences. You can find Kwame's project. You can find any of the projects we talked about today. It's a great place to just go and browse and see what we fund.
So Heather, I'm going to ask a follow-up here, just because I think it might be beneficial for putting farmers first. If you're talking about working with high school students, teaching farmers to work with high school students is farmer first, but teaching high school students to work with farmers is not farmers first. And it's as simple sometimes as that, correct?
Yeah, so yes, thank you, Vander. So let's say you are an urban farmer working with high school students, and you want to are seeking funding to do a case study so that other urban farmers who also work with high school students can understand your model. And this is just one example, but as long as the people who are benefiting from whatever research or education you're doing are other farmers, you can still work with high school students. It's just like you were saying, Vander, the teaching farmers to work with high school students, as long as it benefits the farmers and that's clearly articulated, is fundable.
We had a question, and thank you so much, Heather. We had a question come through in the chat from Lila asking which grant would be the best fit for educating and supporting small minority farmers in urban gardening.
That sounds like a research and education and/or partnership project to me. Although there could also be a farmer grant in there. But in terms of these three, sorry, I'm thinking of all of our programs all the time, but in terms of these three, it's probably a research and education project. And I do almost think somewhere along the line, somebody asked a question about when partnership and when farmer grants were opening this year. And maybe that got answered by text, but I just want to say out loud that the farmer grant call will be released this late summer. And typically has a November deadline. And then the partnership call, similar to these three programs, there may not be a call for proposals for the partnership program next year. If there were to be a call for proposals for that program, that usually comes out, I think, in January. So that's when that call would come out, if it does.
Thank you so much. Yes, we want to make sure we have out there. Oh, we have a question. Can one submit multiple concept papers?
Yes, so up to 2 pre-proposals per these 3 grant programs can be submitted for a total of 6. If multiple pre-proposals are invited to submit a full proposal, you will have to choose one. Only one full proposal across all 3 programs can be submitted.
Any other questions? If not, I want to again thank everybody for coming out and learning, and so many wonderful questions and so many great opportunities. I cannot wait to see which projects come from this. It's going to be a great year for these free proposals. Again, reach out if you have any questions to our about a specific program, and you can always learn more at northeast.sare.org. And that how to apply video is very handy. We're going to be sharing that a lot more here in the future so people can get used to working with that system. 1,500 words is all it takes to apply. So you could be having a pre-proposal application and very soon. Thank you again, everyone. And please, if you can, complete the survey after the webinar concludes. We will be sending out the slides and the recording from today. So look for those.